Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, we concluded last episode talking about how there are many different pathways to charity and love, and how many of us, I think, miss some of the basic starting points that haven't gone phased out of everyday life, but using your example of how if miracles, even though they happen all the time, don't view like miracles because they're happening all the time, particularly through the sacraments, how examples of charity tend to have the same thing, because at least in my vision, when I think of charity, I think of things that, people going to a soup kitchen or something like that, and actually physically doing things where people don't consider, even though I think they should, um, giving donations to charities and stuff like that is equally important as being involved with a charity on their board. As far as everything, they need both people to actually come up and willing to help, but if there's no money, it doesn't really work either. So not to say that one's more important than the other, because you certainly need both. But I think that the way we view things sometimes is that almost giving a check's an easy way out, and we can't do it. And I start there because I think that there are many examples that we do towards charity that people just, it's just what they're supposed to do, so it doesn't count. You're supposed to, feed your children, so that doesn't count as charity. You're supposed to be nice in general and kind of functional in life, so you're doing that, so that doesn't really count. So I wanted to kind of highlight and talk about things that we do and should appreciate, because it is going down that road and it does lead towards better things. And focusing on these regular activities can ultimately lead us to give more attention to it, do them better, and therefore have a better result of more charity. That being said, that entire framework I just created could be completely flawed. So that's why I want to hand it to you before I take us down a completely wrong direction.
Yeah, thanks for opening up those subjects. We have a little bit of a vocabulary problem, probably in every language, but certainly in English. When I say charity, in my mind is always caritas, and anyway, I've tied words together that normal people don't necessarily tie together. But charity in Greek is agape, and in Greek, the expressions of love have a little bit more nuance than in English. In English, we have love that comes to us through the German language from Liebe, and we have charity that comes to us from French, charité or whatever it is. And so we distinguish those two words a little bit, but charity doesn't have the full kind of biblical sense that we would find in the Greek, for example. So we've sort of tied together charity, like with charities, Catholic charities, or doing charity work, or giving to charity, more than we use the word in a straightforward, in the biblical way. So you're exactly right. Now charity, where all of those things are charity. They are caritas, agape, which is really self-sacrificial love. Willing the good of the other is a simple definition, that I'm going to do what's good for someone else, and even at my own expense. I mean, that's what we're talking about, and that's the sort of deep movement of God that we participate in when we say God is love, God is charity, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. That's self-sacrificing, or that willing the good of the other, even at the expense of ourselves. And that's ultimately revealed by Christ on the cross. Christ crucified is the ultimate icon of Christian charity. So if you want the full definition of charity in the biblical sense, look at a cross. That's where he wills the good of all of us, our salvation, even at the greatest expense to himself, bearing all of the suffering and sin of the world, and dying on a cross. So That's the fullest sense. Just to dip into the one area that you opened up there in terms of charity in the sense of really works of mercy is probably where that fits a little bit better if we want a more limited definition. Corporal works of mercy, so bodily works of mercy in particular. And you're so right. It's become a little bit trite in Catholic circles, I suppose, but maybe not for non-professionals. We talk about time, talent, and treasure. And it's actually a very useful division of ways that we can give. As you pointed out, certainly time in works of mercy, bodily works of mercy, like a food kitchen or a food pantry or a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter or something like that, that giving our time, even if we don't feel like we have a particular gift for it, but just having a warm body there, to say it in a very crass way, but just having a person there who has a face and who is willing to sacrifice some of their time. You're saying to someone, you're worth my time. Time is really the most limited resource we have. We can increase wealth, we can't increase time. And so to give our time is really meaningful and is important. And then when we can give our talent, and that's the kind of person who knows how to cook at a soup kitchen. That's always a nice thing. If you have
Mm-hmm.
somebody there who knows how to cook, and the person who's willing to do that, let alone a person who cooks really well. And then we start to move into some kind of beautiful things. The gourmet chef who makes meals for homeless men. And there's something really beautiful about that, where we see incredible talent put in the service of those who could never earn it and who really feel like they don't deserve it. Talent in that sense, or talent in the organizational sense. It's wonderful to have somebody who can kind of manage the process and who has a real knack for loving others, who has a knack for relationships and can really be present to the men and women who come to a soup kitchen, or uh, a person who can manage a food pantry, or the person who can really take care of the legal needs for a homeless shelter, or someone like yourself who knows houses and real estate and construction crews and has connections and can manage to help somebody who's in need, get somebody who wants to do a little bit of good work to do some work on their house. There's a lot of ways that we can share our talent, and that feels really good. I've also become sensitive to CEOs, businessmen who are really gifted at strategy and visioning and creating governance processes and management, and asking them to come and help in a parish. Priests, pastors often don't have those skills. They have other skills, but they really need those skills. And so rather than just asking a businessman to open up his pocketbook, how wonderful to ask him to give those talents to the parish or to some particular activity in the parish. And then, as you say, the treasure is also important. We can't, money does make the world go round in many ways, and
Mm-hmm.
so having that donation of money makes an incredible difference. And every penny counts. That's a and I have to say the church is particularly efficient because we have a lot of volunteers, and our bureaucracy is much more limited. To run a school district, a Catholic school, is a lot less people at the diocesan levels and higher organizational levels than running a public school system. When the way that we manage our parishes that have millions of people attending them are managed on a very small staff, a very small budget, comparatively speaking. So it really is a good donation. Not that there aren't some boneheaded moves and there are some bad examples in terms of money management, but by and large, really it's incredibly efficient use of money because of the motivation that people have in their hearts, because we get some of the most talented people whom we could never afford, but because they volunteer their time, a little money goes a long way with very talented people. So, uh, time, talent, and treasure is really good to invest in the world of works of mercy or charity in the way that we often use that word. And that's just a part of charity when I speak about the word as the highest expression, what miracles lead towards. And the kind of charity for the poor is one expression of that ultimate charity, which involves the love of a husband for his wife, and the love of a wife for a husband, the love of parents for children. That's willing the good of the other, even to the expense of self. That self-sacrificing love.
And as you go through that, you see the almost inherent requirement to make ourselves more talented in that in its nature, making ourselves more talented will create more charity. It's an additive, if not multiplying effect to it. So obviously there's some vocations that people can directly and instinctually think like, oh, you're a nurse working in the ER, you're directly saving lives. That's a direct gift of charity. We can see how you're helping things versus, okay, you've figured out how to make paint a different color. Like, does that really matter? Well, yeah, it does. For years, and we have always known that black absorbs the most heat and energy, but every single roof and tar product for decades was black. And then we started building things in really hot places like the desert, and everything out there was black. And some guy realized, if we do this shade of paint, we will save the heating costs of this building. So now the building guy wants to use that, blah, blah, blah. So at the end of the day, what happened? He's using less electricity. The electricity then goes to more people. And instead of them spending money on electricity, they can spend it on developing their talents, giving it to other forms of charity. And essentially every innovation, whether directly or indirectly, is helping someone around you. And I think that's one of the joys of our economy at the end of the day. Because no one's forcing you to buy anything, people go to things that help them either in their wants or needs the most. So if you're helping with those, which a successful business is by default, you are helping creating a better life for the person recipient. If every farmer woke up today and said, I'm not making grain or food anymore, well, how's that going to work for everyone else? So we wouldn't think of raising a cow as being an act of charity or a talent, but if it wasn't here, how bad would everything be? So I think that these are the types of things that we overlook and don't think of that. We don't think of flyby country or flyover country as, they're doing anything important down there, but if they didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. And I think that that's on a big economic spectrum, but I think there's so many things in our every individual day life that we just miss, that we just overlook because it's routine. So therefore, if it's routine, it can't be special. Kind of going back to the discussion about miracles. If I'm constantly doing something right, it's expected. And if it's expected, it doesn't feel special. And that might be a psychological human nature thing that I'm trying to discuss here, but the importance of recognizing what we're doing, even if it's small or ordinary, of having such meaningful impact and helping so much more than us. Because a lot of us can see the negative. Does a father being around help? Well, yeah. Can we prove it directly by the conversations you're having with a kid? No, but we can certainly prove that a child raised with only a single parent is statistically way worse off in every measurable way. So something does matter, even if we can't concretely prove what actually is the missing ingredient, if you will. So I wanted to focus on that a little bit to basically tell people, we're doing important things, and it's not just so that we're avoiding hell. It's actually creating charity and having a massive multiplier effect.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I would just well, I love everything that you just said there, and if I can augment one thing, you talked about how talent leads to greater charity, and I would say talent can lead to greater charity, and that's actually, we need to couple those things together. We need to develop talent, and we also need to put talent in the service of charity. Now, as you point out, the guy that's making better roofing tiles may not have in mind the ripple effect, the potentially positive ripple effect that that will have. But he can have that in mind to a certain degree, and the more that we can have that in mind, and the more that we can be somewhat intentional and thoughtful about charity, is really valuable. And so I always forget Saint Therese or Mother Teresa, and maybe Mother Teresa quoted Saint Therese, but ordinary things with extraordinary love. So we can always put more love into what we're doing. Just because we're creating roofing tiles doesn't mean that it has to be devoid of love. We can create roofing tiles with love. And so we should just be putting love into everything that we're doing. And then, as John of the Cross said, where there is no love, put love, and then you will find love. If we put love in, we get love out. And and in fact, in a multiplying way, love is always spreading itself. And so when we do things with love, and then that's going to affect the quality, the way that we do them, the way that we interact with others as we do them. It affects all of that. But then also to say, as you mentioned earlier, love is infinite. And so the smallest act of love is also infinite. The largest act of love is infinite. And so whether a small act of love, that is to say, a small thing with great love, or a great thing with great love, there's great love. And that makes it accessible also to the housewife, and it makes it accessible to the poor man, and it makes it accessible to the Jeff Bezos of the world, who have lots of power and privilege and opportunity. So love is the measure, and love is the opportunity, and love is what we want to maximize, and love is what we want to put into everything, and what we want to get out of everything, and we want to put everything into the service of love. And so that really shifts our perspective. It shifts our intentionality, it shifts our motivation, it shifts our priorities and what we make primary. We don't sacrifice love for the sake of product. We sacrifice product for the sake of love. The orienting those priorities makes a big difference in how we live and work and serve and enter into relationships.
So let's dive into that a little bit more. So say you're like most of us, sitting behind a computer all day, and maybe working from home, maybe working in a line of cubicles, as I've done in my prior life, just sitting in front of a computer and not really having interaction. Kind of thinking that is because it was my worst job I've ever had in my life, like the most drab and soulless thing I've ever had. Using that as the hardest example, how could we kind of insert love into that type of situation, just sitting at a computer and getting blinded by white screens?
Well, I guess I would question what the inner dialogue is that's going on in that setting. The external result may be very much the same from one cubicle to the next, but what's the inner dialogue? What am I thinking about? Who am I doing it for? Who am I having conversations with in my head? Who do I wish were actually seeing the product of my work? Who do I wish were there to help me when I run into difficulties? Who am I looking forward to seeing when I go home? Where do I find my motivation to keep going? Am I doing it out of fear of my boss and the whip that's going to crack? Am I hearing the negative criticisms of those who will review my work? Or am I doing it out of love for God and love for neighbor? Am I doing it out of love for my family and to provide for them? I'd say that the difference is going to be in the internal state of the person working. That internal dialogue is going to make the difference in whether I'm doing it out of love, with great love, or whether I'm doing it out of bitterness and hatred and feeling forced into that place. And that's where we can see, when we see the freedom of the interior space. Now, I'm painting that in somewhat idyllic terms, because I'm making it sound like no matter what, we can just choose one or the other. I mean, the reality is,
Mm-hmm.
when we're in environments of negativity and when the boss is breathing down our neck, it becomes very hard to do it have an inner dialogue of love with the Blessed Virgin Mary, or thinking of your wife being there, and that you're working for your family and you're going to bring home a check to put food on the table for your son. It makes it hard when there are negative factors coming at us, but it's not impossible. And that's what we can aim towards. That's real interior freedom, to be able to have a space, an interior space that's inviolable and that we keep sacred for the Lord and for those loving relationships in our lives. And that's what saints were able to do in concentration camps. That is possible. Our bodies get beaten up and our minds become weary, and it's harder to maintain the kind of purity or elegance of that internal dialogue. But it's possible to move in that direction, and that's one area that we can really make a transformation in today. We can start working on today.
And I love the fact that that's something that we can flip ourselves. There's no, you have to be able to run a 4.3 to be able to do this. You don't need to be a physical specimen or have a PhD. It's something we internally can choose. And that's something that we can do moving forward here throughout the upcoming week, to think about, am I getting trapped into a negative situation, or am I looking for the positive outcomes out of this? Because at the end of the day, unless I'm misconstruing something here, the positive outcomes are ultimately going to be based in relationships and love. I'm doing this for someone. When you were going through that list of questions, who am I doing this for? On earth, it's going to be for someone that's going to be a relationship that generates love by default, and charity is the path of getting there. So, unless I was incorrect about that, that was the answer I was getting. It's something that we all can mentally choose to do. So something that we can think of as we're moving forward and in our lives, both this week and in the long term. So we thank you for doing this episode with me today, Father, and we'll be with everyone again next week.